It was a normal day at the grocery store. My daughter was standing next to me, holding the shopping cart. She was smiling and asking if she could get her favorite cereal. Then suddenly, a woman started yelling. An HOA Karen was shouting about rules and behavior in the middle of the store. People turned to look. She was angry and out of control. Suddenly, she pointed a gun. "Shot my daughter." My daughter screamed and fell to the ground in shock. She wasn't moving and my heart stopped for a moment. People screamed. Items fell from the shelves. The whole store turned into chaos. I ran to my daughter and dropped to my knees, holding her tight, praying she was alive. But she didn't know one thing. She didn't know whose child she had hurt, was the police chief's daughter. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And please subscribe for more stories where the good guys always win. For a split second after my daughter hit the floor, the world didn't make sense anymore. The sound vanished first. The yelling, the crashing shelves, the screaming customers, it all faded into a dull, distant hum, like I was underwater. My vision narrowed until there was nothing but my child lying on the cold grocery store floor, her small body twisted at an angle no parent should ever have to see. Hey, look at me," I whispered desperately, my hands shaking as I pulled her close. "Baby, look at me." She didn't answer. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs it felt painful. I pressed my ear against her chest, counting seconds that felt like years, begging for any sign, any movement, any breath. Then she let out a soft sound, a whimper. Air rushed back into my lungs so fast it made me dizzy. "She's breathing!" someone shouted nearby. "She's breathing!" I didn't look up. I couldn't. My hands were locked around her shoulders. My body curled over hers like I could shield her from what had already happened. Her eyes fluttered open just slightly. "Daddy," she whispered, confused, scared. "I'm here," I said quickly, my voice breaking despite every effort to stay calm. "I've got you. Don't move. Please don't move." Her fingers twitched weakly and grabbed onto my jacket. That was when the noise came crashing back. People were screaming now, real screaming. Carts were abandoned in the aisles. A glass jar shattered somewhere behind us, followed by the sharp smell of spilled food and cleaning chemicals. A store employee yelled for everyone to get down. Another shouted that the police had been called. Across the aisle, the woman still stood there. The gun was still in her hand. She looked stunned, like she couldn't understand what she had just done. Her mouth opened and closed, words tumbling out without meaning. "She shouldn't have been there!" She yelled. She moved too fast. This wouldn't have happened if people followed rules. No one answered her. No one cared what she was saying anymore. Fear had taken over the store completely. Customers hid behind shelves. Someone pulled a child into their arms and covered their head. A man near the end of the aisle screamed at her to drop the weapon. She didn't. She just stood there, shaking, yelling, unraveling in real time. I focused on my daughter. Her face was pale. Her breathing was shallow but steady. She was alive. That single fact was the only thing holding me together. "You're okay," I whispered again and again, even though I didn't know if it was true. "You're okay. Daddy's here." Blood wasn't everywhere. There was no graphic horror. Just the unbearable knowledge that something violent had happened to a child who moments ago was talking about cereal. That made it worse. Someone knelt beside me, another customer, hands trembling. "I know first aid," they said softly. "Help is coming." I nodded, unable to speak. My daughter winced and tried to move. "Don't," I said gently but firmly. "Stay still, please." She nodded weakly, tears slipping down the side of her face. "I was just standing," she whispered. "I didn't do anything." Those words shattered me. "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "I know." The woman started crying suddenly, her voice shrill and desperate. "I didn't mean to," she screamed. "Someone should have stopped her." Stopped her from what? Standing next to her father? Holding a shopping cart? Asking for cereal? The store alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed. Somewhere near the entrance, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens growing louder by the second. Police. Real police. The woman heard them too. Her head snapped toward the doors. Panic washed over her face. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not of what she'd done, but of what was coming. She lowered the gun slowly. It clattered to the floor. Officers rushed in moments later. Voices loud and controlled, weapons drawn, commands clear. Hands up. Step away from the weapon. She dropped to her knees, sobbing incoherently as she was restrained and pulled away. I didn't look. I couldn't stop looking at my daughter. Paramedics pushed through the crowd, their movements fast but calm. They knelt beside us, asking questions, checking her vitals, speaking in steady voices that felt like lifelines. "She's conscious," one of them said. "Pulse is steady." I finally let myself breathe. They carefully lifted her onto a stretcher. She reached for me immediately, fear flashing across her face. "Daddy, don't leave me." "I'm right here," I said, gripping her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." As they wheeled her toward the exit, a police officer walked alongside us. He looked down at my daughter, then back at me. His expression changed. "Chief," he said quietly, recognition clear in his eyes. The paramedic paused. So did the officer behind him. The words rippled outward, changing the energy in the store instantly. The woman, now cuffed, looked up sharply. "What?" she whispered. The officer didn't raise his voice. "That's the police chief," he said. "And that's his daughter." Her face drained of all color. She stared at my child as if seeing her for the first time, not as a target, not as a rule breaker, not as something to control, but as a human being with a father who would move heaven and earth for her. "I didn't know," she whispered. I met her eyes for the first time. "She was buying cereal," I said quietly. She had no answer. As the stretcher rolled out of the store and into the waiting ambulance, the chaos behind us faded. Shelves could be restocked, glass could be swept up, statements could be taken, but nothing would ever undo what happened in that aisle. My daughter squeezed my hand weakly. "Daddy," she whispered, "am I in trouble?" Tears blurred my vision. "No," I said. "You did nothing wrong. Not ever." The doors closed, the sirens rose, and the woman who thought rules gave her power finally understood. She hadn't hurt just any child. She had hurt the daughter of the man who would make sure this was never treated like an accident. Time didn't slow down. It fractured. 1 second I was kneeling on the grocery store floor with my daughter in my arms, whispering her name over and over, and the next second felt stretched so thin it could snap. Every sound arrived late. Every movement felt delayed, like the world itself was struggling to keep up with what had just happened. "Daddy." Her voice was weak, confused, barely there, but it existed. And that single fact kept me breathing. "I'm here," I said immediately, pressing my forehead gently against hers. "I'm right here. Don't move, okay? Just stay with me." Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, searching for something familiar. When they found my face, her fingers tightened in my jacket, clinging like she was afraid I might disappear. "I was just standing," she whispered. "I didn't do anything." "I know," I said. "I know. You're okay. You're safe." I didn't know if that was true yet. Around us, the store was unraveling. People were shouting now, real shouting, not confused murmurs. Someone screamed for an ambulance. Another person yelled that the police coming. A shopping cart crashed over nearby, spilling food across the floor as someone scrambled backward, glass shattered. An alarm started blaring. The sound was piercing, relentless, but it felt distant compared to the pounding of my heart. I barely registered it as I adjusted my grip, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other braced protectively across her chest. She was breathing, shallow, uneven, but breathing. "Sir, don't move her," someone said near me. A woman knelt beside us, hands shaking. "Help is coming. I've already called." I nodded, unable to form words. Across the aisle, the woman who had fired the shot was still there. She hadn't run. She stood frozen, her face twisted with panic and disbelief, the gun hanging loosely in her hand. She was talking, rambling, incoherent sentences spilling out of her mouth. "She shouldn't have been there. She startled me. This wouldn't have happened if people followed rules." No one answered her. No one was listening. Fear had replaced curiosity. People hid behind shelves. Parents pulled their children close and shielded them with their bodies. A man shouted at her to drop the weapon, his voice cracking with terror. She didn't respond. I blocked her from my vision. I refused to let her exist in this moment. My world had shrunk to the rise and fall of my daughter's chest, to the faint warmth of her hand gripping mine, to the desperate calculation running through my mind. Is she bleeding? Is she in shock? How long until help arrives? Stay with me, I whispered again, my voice shaking despite every effort to stay calm. You're doing so good. Just stay with me. Her breathing hitched. Daddy, it hurts, she said softly. I know, I replied, my throat tightening. Help is coming. You're not alone. Seconds crawled. They felt endless. The store felt unreal, like a set abandoned mid-scene. Shelves stood crooked, food littered the floor. A child cried somewhere in the distance, the sound muffled and hollow. Then, sirens. Faint at first, then louder, then unmistakable. The sound cut through everything. People reacted immediately. Someone shouted, "Police!" Another person cried with relief. The woman with the gun turned pale, her head snapping toward the entrance. Fear finally reached her. Her hand began to shake. She looked around wildly, as if only now realizing where she was and what she had done. The confidence she'd shouted with moments earlier was gone, replaced by panic and confusion. I didn't mean to, she cried suddenly, her voice breaking. I didn't mean it. She dropped the gun. It hit the floor with a dull clatter that echoed louder than it should have. Gun down, someone yelled. Officers rushed in seconds later, moving fast and controlled, weapons drawn but steady, voices clear and commanding. Hands where we can see them. Get on the ground. The woman collapsed to her knees, sobbing, repeating herself over and over as she was restrained and pulled away. I didn't look. I didn't need to. Paramedics were already pushing through the crowd, their movements precise and focused. They knelt beside us immediately, one checking my daughter's pulse, another speaking softly to her. Sweetheart, can you hear me? You're doing great. Keep looking at your dad. She's conscious, one of them said. That's good. I exhaled for the first time since she fell. They carefully positioned a stretcher beside us. My daughter reached for me instantly, fear flashing across her face. Daddy, don't leave me. I'm not, I said quickly, gripping her hand as they lifted her gently. I'm right here. As they wheeled her toward the doors, I walked beside her, my hand never leaving hers. An officer moved alongside us, his expression serious but calm. He glanced down at my daughter, then back at me. His face changed. Chief, he said quietly. The word landed heavier than the gunshot. The paramedic paused. Another officer looked over sharply. The woman, now handcuffed, lifted her head. What? She whispered. The officer didn't raise his voice. That's the police chief, he said evenly. And that's his daughter. The color drained from her face. She stared at my child as if she were seeing her for the first time, not as a rule breaker, not as something to control, but as a human being with a name, a family, and a father who would never stop fighting for her. I didn't know, she whispered. I met her eyes once. She was asking for cereal, I said quietly. She had no answer. The ambulance doors closed. The sirens rose again, louder this time, purposeful. As we pulled away, my daughter squeezed my hand, weakly. Daddy, she whispered, am I in trouble? Tears finally spilled down my face. No, I said. You did nothing wrong, not ever. The store disappeared behind us. But those seconds, those unbearable, endless seconds, would never leave me. Because in them, everything that mattered was tested. And my daughter survived. Karen didn't run. That was the first thing that struck everyone watching. After the gun clattered to the grocery store floor and the screaming surged around her, after parents dragged children behind shelves and employees dropped to the ground in terror, Karen didn't flee. She stood there shaking, eyes wide, chest heaving, like she couldn't believe the world had stopped obeying her. I didn't mean it, she shouted again, her voice breaking but still loud enough to cut through the chaos. She shouldn't have moved. People need to follow rules. Her words bounced uselessly off the walls. No one responded. No one cared what she was saying anymore. Fear had shifted into something heavier, something colder, outrage. Customers stared at her from behind, overturned. Carts and end caps, their faces no longer confused, no longer frozen. Now they were angry. A man near the frozen food section shouted at her to get on the ground. A woman screamed that she'd hurt a child. Another customer yelled that she was insane. Karen backed up a step, startled by the sudden hostility. Stop yelling at me, she screamed. You're all overreacting. Overreacting. The word was almost laughable. A child lay injured only yards away. the smell of spilled groceries mixed with fear and adrenaline. Alarms wailed overhead. And Karen, who minutes ago had been shouting about behavior and rules, now looked shocked that the crowd had turned against her. She raised her hands, palms outward, as if trying to calm everyone. "I'm not the bad guy here," she insisted. "She startled me." No one believed her. A store employee crouched behind a shelf, whispering into a phone with shaking hands. "Yes, there's been a shooting. Yes, a child. Please hurry." Karen heard that word, child, and flinched. For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. She glanced toward my daughter, toward me, and then she looked away again, like if she didn't acknowledge us, none of this would be real. "I didn't know she'd be there," Karen muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "This isn't my fault." Her voice cracked. She was losing control, not because she felt guilt, but because her authority had evaporated. The rules she'd clung to like armor meant nothing now. No one was listening. No one was deferring. She was just another person with a gun who had hurt a child, and the crowd knew it. A man shouted, "Get away from her!" Another yelled, "Put your hands up!" Karen spun in circles, overwhelmed, tears streaking down her face. "Stop yelling!" she screamed again. "You're making it worse." Worse than what? Worse than a father kneeling on a grocery store floor, whispering to his injured dog. Worse than a child crying because she didn't understand why asking for cereal turned into this. Karen's breathing grew fast and shallow. She looked trapped, not physically, but by the reality closing in on her. She took another step back, then another, bumping into a shelf. Cans rattled and fell. The noise made her jump. "I said stop," she yelled, her voice shrill now, panicked. "You're not in charge." That sentence was telling. She wasn't afraid of what she'd done. She was afraid she no longer controlled the room. Then the sirens grew louder, not distant anymore. Real, close. Karen froze. Her head snapped toward the entrance, eyes wide with terror. The sound sliced through the chaos with surgical precision, drowning out her shouting, drowning out everything else. Sirens meant authority, real authority. Not shouted rules, not imaginary power, the kind that doesn't argue. Her hands began to shake violently. The gun, already dropped, felt suddenly very far away, like it belonged to someone else entirely. "I didn't mean it," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "I didn't mean it." The crowd didn't soften. If anything, they grew quieter, watching, waiting, because they knew what was coming. The automatic doors at the front of the store burst open. Police officers flooded in with controlled speed, weapons raised but steady, voices loud and clear. "Police! Get on the ground! Hands up! Now!" Karen collapsed instantly, dropping to her knees like her legs had given out. She sobbed uncontrollably, hands shaking as she raised them, repeating the same broken sentence over and over. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it." Officers moved in, securing the weapon first, then her wrists. The click of handcuffs cut through the store louder than any scream had. That sound carried weight, finality. Karen cried out as she was pulled to her feet, her earlier shouting completely. Gone now. She looked small, lost, like she had no idea how she'd ended up here, and maybe she didn't, but it didn't matter. Because intentions don't erase consequences. As officers led her away, she twisted her head back toward the aisle where my daughter lay on the stretcher. Her eyes met mine. For the first time, she saw me, not as an obstacle, not as someone to argue with, not as part of the crowd, but as a father. And in that moment, something finally registered. "Is she okay?" Karen whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the store was no longer her stage. Her voice no longer mattered. Her excuses had no audience left. She was escorted out of the store in silence. Behind her, life didn't return to normal, but it began moving again. Paramedics worked efficiently. Officers taped off the area. Witnesses were gathered, voices low, faces pale. A store manager stood trembling near the registers, staring at the floor. I stayed with my daughter, holding her hand, talking softly, refusing to let go, as the stretcher rolled past the cereal aisle, the place where she'd been smiling just minutes earlier. I felt a hollow ache settle deep in my chest. Karen had lost control long before the sirens arrived. She lost it the moment she believed entitlement gave her the right to harm. And now, with handcuffs on her wrists and real authority standing between her and the world. She finally understood something she never had before. Control is an illusion, and once it's gone, all that's left is what you did. The sirens didn't arrive gently. They cut through the grocery store like a blade, sharp and unmistakable, slicing through the chaos Karen had created. For the first time since the gunshot, the noise inside the store didn't feel directionless anymore. It had an answer. The wail grew louder by the second, echoing off glass doors and metal carts, until it drowned out everything else. Karen's sobbing, the murmurs of the crowd, even the alarms overhead. Every person inside the store felt it in their chest before they fully processed it in their ears. Sirens meant order. Not the kind Karen had screamed about. The real kind. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, and uniformed officers poured in with practiced speed. Their movements were precise, efficient, and calm. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Weapons were drawn but steady. Voices were loud, controlled, and impossible to ignore. Police! Everyone stay where you are. Hands visible. On the ground if you can. The crowd obeyed instantly. That alone said everything. Karen had spent minutes yelling, demanding obedience, claiming authority. The officers spoke once, and the store complied. People froze where they stood. Parents shielded children. Employees stayed low behind counters. Real authority didn't need repetition. Karen collapsed as soon as she saw them. Her knees hit the floor hard, the sound lost beneath the sirens as they finally cut off outside. She raised her hands clumsily, sobbing, her earlier rage completely gone. "I didn't mean it," she cried. "I didn't mean to." Officers didn't answer. They moved. One secured the firearm where it lay on the floor, carefully kicking it out of reach before lifting it with gloved hands. Another officer approached Karen from behind, voice firm and flat. "Do not move." She didn't. Her shoulders shook violently as she was handcuffed, the metal clicking closed with a sound that felt heavier than the gunshot itself. That sound wasn't chaos. It was consequence. I stayed kneeling beside my daughter as the officers worked. My body was angled protectively toward her, one hand gripping hers, the other resting lightly on her shoulder to keep her still. She was awake now, eyes glassy but focused on me, breathing uneven but steady. "Daddy," she whispered. "Ed, I'm here," I said immediately. "You're doing great," she swallowed. "Why are the lights flashing?" "Because help is here," I said softly. Paramedics followed close behind the officers, pushing a stretcher through the scattered carts and fallen groceries. Their presence changed the energy in the store instantly. Fear didn't vanish, but it steadied. One knelt beside us and spoke gently to my daughter, explaining everything before touching her, asking permission, telling her she was brave. She nodded weakly, trusting them in the way children do when adults finally act like adults again. "She's conscious," the medic said to his partner. "Vitals are stable." The words hit me like oxygen. Another officer approached me while the medics worked. His gaze moved from my daughter to my face, and then he froze. Just for a second. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Sir," he started, then stopped. He straightened immediately. "Chief," he said quietly. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. The effect was immediate. Nearby officers glanced over. One of the paramedics looked up sharply. Conversations paused. The store felt like it tilted slightly, the weight of that recognition shifting everything into focus. Karen heard it too. She lifted her head slowly, her sobbing hitching as she looked past the officers restraining her and toward me. Her eyes widened, not in anger, not in denial, but in dawning realization. "Chief?" she whispered. No one corrected him. No one needed to. The officer nodded once, respectful, then spoke clearly for the record. "Sir, we have the suspect in custody, weapon secured." I nodded back. "Thank you." Karen stared at my daughter like she was seeing her for the first time. Not as a target, not as a problem, not as someone to control. As a child. "She's your daughter?" Karen asked weakly. I didn't raise my voice. "Yes," I said. She was asking for cereal. The simplicity of the sentence seemed to crush her. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked away, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. The rules she'd screamed about, the authority she'd pretended to have. None of it mattered now. She had crossed a line that could never be argued away. Officers guided her to her feet. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. The woman who had filled the store with shouting minutes earlier now looked small, folded inward, swallowed by the reality she could no longer escape. As she was led toward the exit, the crowd parted silently. No insults, no yelling, just the quiet understanding that something irreversible had happened. The paramedics carefully lifted my daughter onto the stretcher. She reached for me instantly, fear flickering across her face. "Daddy, don't leave me." "I'm right here," I said, gripping her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." I walked beside her as they wheeled her toward the doors. Officers flanked us, not to guard me, but to protect her path. The flashing lights outside painted the store in red and blue, colors that now meant safety instead of chaos. As we passed the cereal aisle, I caught a glimpse of the shelf where she'd been smiling just minutes before. The box she'd asked for still sat there, untouched. That image burned itself into me. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, clearer. The ambulance doors opened, and the paramedics guided the stretcher inside with careful precision. I climbed in beside her without hesitation, still holding her hand. She squeezed back weakly. "Am I in trouble?" she asked quietly. Tears blurred my vision. "No," I said. "You did nothing wrong. Not ever." The doors closed, the sirens started again. But this time, they didn't sound like danger. They sounded like resolution. Behind us, the grocery store would be cleaned. Statements would be taken. Video would be reviewed. Procedures would unfold exactly as they were meant to. But inside the ambulance, none of that mattered. What mattered was this. Karen's shouting had ended. False authority had collapsed. And real authority, calm, deliberate, unavoidable, had arrived right on time. Truth has a sound. It isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It settles. By the time the ambulance doors closed and the sirens carried my daughter away, the grocery store no longer felt like a crime scene in motion. It felt like a place where something had already been decided, not emotionally, factually. Yellow tape stretched across aisles that would soon be restocked. Officers moved with calm precision, not urgency, because urgency was no longer needed. The danger had passed. What remained was documentation, and documentation does not argue. Karen sat on the curb outside, hands cuffed in front of her now, shoulders slumped. An officer stood nearby, posture neutral, not hostile, not sympathetic, just present. She looked around as if expecting someone to defend her. No one did. Inside the store, witnesses were separated carefully. Names were written down. Times were logged. Phones were collected. Not confiscated, just identified. Video evidence was already being preserved from security cameras, angles overlapping, timestamps undeniable. The truth was everywhere. A detective approached Karen with a small recorder clipped to his jacket. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you a few questions." Karen nodded quickly. "I want to explain." He didn't react to that statement. "State your name," he said. She did. "Do you understand why you're being detained?" Karen hesitated. "Well, yes, but..." "Do you understand why?" he repeated. She swallowed. "Because there was an accident." The detective made a small note. "Tell me what happened." Karen inhaled deeply, gathering herself like she'd done so many times before when she belie. Eve's explanation could reshape reality. "She startled me," Karen said quickly. "The child moved suddenly. I felt threatened." The detective's pen paused. "A child holding a shopping cart?" he asked. Karen frowned. She was acting strangely. "How?" "She was staring," Karen insisted. "People can't just stare at strangers. That's inappropriate." The detective didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked, "Did she say anything to you?" "No." "Did she touch you?" "No." "Did she approach you?" "No." The silence stretched. "So," he said evenly, "she was standing near her parent, holding a cart, and asking for cereal." Karen's mouth opened, closed. "I panicked," she said finally. The detective nodded once, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. "Where did you get the firearm?" Karen stiffened. "I have a permit, that's not what I asked," he replied calmly. She exhaled sharply. "It's mine. Why was it drawn?" Karen's voice dropped. "I don't know." The recorder caught everything. Nearby, witnesses gave their statements. A cashier described hearing yelling before the shot. A mother described pulling her son behind a shelf. An elderly man described watching a child fall and a father scream her name. Their stories matched, not perfectly, but truth doesn't need perfection. It needs consistency. Security footage was reviewed on site. No sudden movement from my daughter. No confrontation, no threat. Just a child standing beside her parent. The detective returned to Karen. Multiple witnesses and video confirmed the child did nothing to provoke you, he said. Do you have anything to add? Karen stared at the ground. I didn't know who she was, she whispered. The detective looked up. Why would that matter? Karen flinched. If I had known, she started. He stopped her. That statement, he said, is important. She looked confused. You're saying the act would have been DI. Efferent if the child had a different parent. Karen said nothing. That doesn't help you, he continued calmly. It makes things worse. Her shoulders sagged. Inside the ambulance, my daughter slept. Her breathing was even now, exhaustion overtaking fear. I sat beside her, holding her hand, watching her chest rise and fall, anchoring myself to that rhythm. A nurse spoke quietly. We're running tests. She's stable. Thank you, I said. My phone buzzed. Once. Then again. I didn't answer. There would be statements later. Press inquiries later. Administrative procedures later. Right now, I was just a father. Back at the store, Karen was placed into a transport vehicle. As the door closed, she finally looked up again, eyes red, voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt her, she said to no one in particular. The officer responded without emotion. Intent will be considered. Outcome already has. That was the truth. Later at the station, the story fully collapsed. Charges were formalized. Assault with a firearm, reckless endangerment, discharge of a weapon in a public place. Each charge carried weight, not emotional, not symbolic, legal. Karen was offered water, medical evaluation, a phone call. She sat in the interview room staring at her hands. For the first time, there was no audience, no crowd, no noise, no one to dominate, just walls, a table, and the truth. She tried again. I thought rules mattered, she said quietly. They do, the detective replied. That's why this happened. She looked up sharply. Rules exist to protect people, he continued, not to justify hurting them. Karen laughed weakly. That's not how it usually works. The detective leaned back slightly. It does when it matters. The interview ended shortly after. There was nothing left to clarify. Outside the hospital room, officers stood watch, not because of my position, but because a child had been harmed. That distinction mattered. A nurse adjusted my daughter's blanket. She'll wake up soon, she said gently. When she did, her first words were barely audible. Daddy, I'm here. Did I get the cereal? The question broke me. I smiled through tears. Not yet. She nodded sleepily. Okay, that was it. No anger, no fear. Just a child trusting the world would make sense again. And somewhere else, a woman who believed entitlement was authority finally understood something she never had before. The truth doesn't care who you think you are. It only cares what you did. And once it comes out, it stays out. The hospital room was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not empty, not cold, just careful. Machines hummed softly at my daughter's bedside, their steady rhythms replacing the chaos that had defined the last several hours. The harsh lights of the grocery store, the screams, the sirens, all of it felt distant now, like something that had happened to another family in another life. But my hand was still wrapped around hers, and she was here. That was everything. She slept on her side, curls spread across the pillow, one arm tucked under the blanket and the other resting limply beside her. Her face was pale but peaceful, lashes fluttering occasionally as dreams pulled her deeper. The doctors had explained everything slowly, carefully, as if volume alone might shatter the fragile calm we'd finally reached. She was stable. She was being monitored. She was going to recover. Those words replayed in my mind on a loop, grounding me every time fear tried to rise again. I leaned forward in the chair, resting my forehead against the edge of the bed, breathing in time with her. In, out, in, out. Each breath felt like permission to exist again, A nurse stepped in quietly, checking monitors, adjusting a line, offering a small, reassuring smile before leaving us alone again. No questions. No explanations needed. Everyone here knew what mattered. I lifted my head when my daughter stirred, her brow furrowing slightly as she shifted under the blanket. Her fingers twitched, searching. I moved closer immediately. "I am here," I whispered. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then they found me. "Daddy?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a breath. "Yes," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm right here." She stared at me for a moment, like she was checking to make sure I was real. Then her lower lip trembled. "I was scared," she said. I nodded. "I know." She was yelling, she continued quietly. I didn't understand. I swallowed hard and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not then. Not ever." She studied my face, searching for doubt, finding none. "Okay," she whispered. That single word carried more trust than anything I had heard all day. She closed her eyes again, drifting back to sleep, her hands still curled around mine. I stayed exactly where I was, unwilling to break the connection even for a second. Outside the room, life went on. Officers rotated quietly in the hallway. Doctors spoke in low tones at the nurses' station. Somewhere down the corridor, another family laughed softly, relief spilling out now that their own emergency had passed. The world didn't stop because of what happened to us. But it slowed, enough to let us breathe. Hours passed that way, marked only by monitor beeps and the gentle shift of daylight fading beyond the window. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about reports, statements, or headlines. I thought about cereal, about the way Deed smiled when she asked for her favorite box, already planning how she'd pour it the next morning. About how ordinary the day had been before everything broke. Ordinary mattered now. When she woke again, the room was dim, lit only by a soft lamp near the bed. She blinked and frowned slightly, then relaxed when she saw me still there. "You didn't leave," she said. "No," I replied, "I won't." She nodded, satisfied, then hesitated. "Daddy, am I in trouble?" The question hurt more than anything else that day. I leaned closer so she could see my face clearly. "No, you are not in trouble. You were brave, and you were kind, and you did exactly what you were supposed to do." She thought about that. "Even when she was mean?" "Especially then," I said. She smiled faintly and squeezed my hand again. Later, when the doctor returned to check on her one last time before the night shift changed, he spoke with quiet confidence. "She's going to be okay," he said. "She'll need rest and time, but she's strong." I nodded. "Thank you." After he left, the weight of the day Allie settled fully into my bones. Exhaustion crept in, not the kind sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from holding yourself together through fear. I rested my head back against the chair and closed my eyes for just a moment. In that moment, images tried to push their way in. The aisle, the noise, the split second where everything went wrong. I pushed them away gently and focused instead on the warmth of her hand, the steady rise and fall of her chest. This was real. This was now, and this was enough. Sometime after midnight, she stirred again. "Daddy? Yes? When can we go home?" "Soon," I said. "Very soon." She smiled sleepily. "Can we still get cereal?" I laughed quietly, a sound that surprised both of us. "Yes," I said. "We'll get all the cereal you want." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. I stayed awake, watching over her, letting the silence do its work. What happened today would never be forgotten. It would be examined, debated, recorded. Consequences would unfold in courtrooms and offices far removed from this quiet room. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, I was holding my child's hand. Right now, she was alive, and in the soft glow of hospital lights, with the world finally still, I understood something with absolute clarity. Authority isn't about power. Justice isn't about titles. It's about making sure a child can sleep peacefully again after someone tried to take that away. And as long as I could hold her hand, nothing else mattered.